Make sure you watch the entire video first to make sure you know what to do before you begin painting on your final project. Okay, starting with the petals first, I'm going to apply water to one petal, but I'm not going to paint it. Okay, so in case if this happens to you, you will know what to do. So I'm going to paint this petal first, and I'm actually not going to let the water go all the way to the next petal. You'll notice there was a little bit of space where the paper stayed dry. Okay, so now I'm going to take my clean water and I'm going to paint with water the next petal, but this one I'm going to actually add color to. Remember, make sure you've got your drops of water in your colors that you want to use so that they're ready to go. Make sure you have a clean brush, clean water. Swirl your brush to pick up the paint. Don't plop it in the paint. Swirl it around. It seemed a little dry, so I just added a little bit more of the water to it. Okay, so adding the paint now to this bottom petal. And I want to do a wet on wet technique, so I'm going to clean my brush and get a little bit of paint. And then I'm just going to dab it right along the edge. This is just one way to do that wet on wet technique. Okay, letting those two colors run into each other and blend. Then I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to get more clean water. Oh, I forgot to get the clean water. All right, getting my clean water. The paper did dry on me before I was able to paint that petal, so now I've got to come back and add more water. I'm going to paint this petal a different color because you might want to paint something, paint part of your painting next to an object that's already wet. So how you paint two objects right next to each other while they're both still wet is what I'm showing you now. So I've got my water down, I'm adding my color, and I'm going to get really close to that other petal without touching it. That's going to be really important that we get really close, but we can't let them touch because if we do, they're going to bleed into each other. Okay, so let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so see how really close I got my paint, but there's still a sliver of dry paper in between those two petals. And that's what you have to do in order to keep two wet colors from running into each other if you don't want them to run into each other. Okay, now I realized that I ended up with a big pool of water on this blue petal, and so I'm going to use a paper towel, the edge of a paper towel, to soak up all that extra water. Okay, so basically kind of like blotting it up. Be very careful, just use the very corner or edge. All right, now we're going to go into the background. So get your clean water, and we're going to paint a patch of water, not on the flower, but like in between spots. Okay, so we're not going to make the water go all the way to the edge. We're going to create, this is what I call a halo. Okay, so I'm going to get my paint color. So I want my background color to be green. So I'm going to swirl in my green paint, pick it up, and then add it to the water. So this is how you paint the background. You have to put the water down first. All right, if I don't paint all the way to the edge, it's going to create a halo. And if I don't put water down first, it's going to create a really bad halo too. There's the halo. I just pointed it out. So with the water, the extra water I have on my paper, what I want to do is I want to take that extra water all the way to the pencil line in that area. I'm going to be really slow and really careful and just using that extra water that's already on the paper to spread out and using my paintbrush to spread it out kind of like a mop. Okay, so all of that paper was wet and the edges were dry. So now I'm just going to very carefully, this is dry, going onto dry paper. I'm still dragging the water with the paint in it onto dry paper. It's just around the edges. And then, so I'm still just dragging on dry paper right now. But what's going to happen is on that dry paper, it's going to create a really harsh edge. So how I get rid of that is by cleaning my brush getting clean water, and then scrubbing that edge. So I'm scrubbing the edge of where I stopped, and now I'm adding more paint. And if I add more paint, I've got to go back and repaint over all the parts so that they're all even. And then that bottom part, I was able to just drag the rest of the paint that I already had down towards the bottom. Okay, so I'm using clean water, I'm scrubbing the edge again so that the edge is nice and kind of fuzzy and not a sharp, harsh line. You don't want a sharp, harsh line, okay? So we want to paint in patches, but we've got to put the water down first. And then I'm going to zoom in here so you can see how really slow and careful I'm going around those little sprouting parts of the flower. Take your time, go really slow, stay out of those little spots, because once you put the watercolor down, you can't get it out. So you got to be really slow and careful. All right, then I'm going to go to the other side of my painting and paint the background on that side. But the red and purple flower are still wet. Okay, so this is what's going to happen is if you paint two things right next to each other and one of them is still wet and you put more water down, they're going to bleed. So you can see right now the purple is bleeding into the water where I want my green background to go. And so this could happen to you. Maybe you want this to happen after you see what it looks like. Maybe you like the way it looks and maybe you want to do this. Okay, but if you don't like the way that it looks and how it bleeds into the other color, how the two wet colors are now blending into each other, if you don't like that, you have to maintain that white dry area that keeps them from bleeding into each other. Okay, and then painting in patches again. So use your wet paint to drag, get water, scrub out the edge so that it stays fuzzy, and then use your paint and your water and your brush to drag the paint throughout the painting to fill in your background. Okay, get clean water, clean your brush, get clean water, scrub, and add the water, and then add more paint. As you add more paint, you do have to repaint over the previous areas because otherwise the color is not the same. Okay, adding more clean water, fuzzing out the edge, more green paint, going over the previous places, and then kind of meeting in the middle where those two come together and trying to get it to where you can't, a seamless blend, so you can't tell where one starts and one stops. So that edge where the two sides come together, it blends in, you can't really tell. Okay, and then this is what it looked like after it was all dry. So you need to decide, do you like where the green ran into the red flower, or do you not like that? If you don't like that, then you're going to have to wait for the petal to dry first, or that spot to dry before you paint around it. You can't paint two wet places together, or they will run into each other. Okay, hopefully you have a good idea now of how to begin painting and what order to go in. I would do the petals first, do each petal individually unless they're all going to kind of be the same color, and then you can do that whole area at once. Let that dry completely unless you want the background to possibly run into it, and then you would want to do the background next. But make sure if you don't want the colors running into each other that you are waiting for each section to dry before you paint again.